It sounds like it might be painful, but it's really a great privilege.
And it's desired by people all over the world, but not everyone can get it.
Do you know what it is? Hi, I'm Sid, and welcome to Democracy Rules. If you guessed it was suffrage, you'd be right. And you'd be in a minority of people who actually know what the word means.
Hi, I'm Shavela. Let's see who knows what. Can you tell me what suffrage means?
I think it's the women's right to vote.
Suffrage is when things are not going well for someone. They are suffering.
Suffrage is the right to vote, and many people consider suffrage to be the women's right to vote. But through history, it is the black vote, which was in the early 1900s, mid-1900s, and the women's vote also.
I think a lot of people have suffered, but I don't know suffrage. I don't know that term.
Actually, the definition of suffrage is really easy. It's the right to vote. And no, it wasn't addressed anywhere in the Constitution.
That really surprised me that specifics of voting weren't addressed in either the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. You could conclude that the right to vote isn't important, but nothing is further from the truth. Let's go to our resident expert, Senator Les Miller, for a perspective on the right to vote. Senator?
Thanks, Sid. Today I'm talking with Ms. Betty Castro, Director of the Patel Center for Global Solutions at my alma mater, my place of employment at the University of South Florida. Betty, thank you so very much for being with us today. I appreciate you being here.
I'm delighted to be here.
You had a long, successful, and illustrious career as an elected official, first being the first woman to serve on the Florida cabinet, and then being the first woman to serve as President Pro Tem of the Florida Senate. And having been there, I know how difficult and how intense that position is. Tell us a little bit about any obstacles that you ran into in being the first woman in those positions and running for office.
Well, I was the first woman elected to the Hillsborough County Commission, and that was way back in 1972. Things were different. People didn't expect women to run for office, and there were very few in public office. So you had people that wondered, were you qualified? Did you know the issues? Could you debate? Some very, very basic questions. I had 3 children at the time who were young, and of course the question arose of what are you going to do? You're going to leave those children at home. How will they ever succeed? So you had to kind of overcome some stereotypes about women in public office. But soon after I ran, many other women in the Tampa Bay area ran for office. While there were impediments, I must say that there were great advantages because it was the beginning of an awareness on the part of women and all people. Women were entering the professions, and it was the beginning of the women's movement. So that was also a boost.
So you were a trailblazer. You basically opened the door for many women that came along and that have now served on our county commission and mayor and city council.
And women dominate school boards in this area. We've had several women serve as mayors of Tampa and St. Petersburg. Women serve on the county commissions and now in Congress. So they've been moving up the ladder. I think we've kind of reached a little bit of a plateau in terms of women representatives in the legislature. And we have to go back and make sure that women feel confident about running for office.
Well, I don't know about that. I've served with quite a few women up there, and they do very, very, very well. And
absolutely.
I'm quite sure we're going to continue to see that. I have the opportunity to serve with, live with my wife, who's a member of the Tampa City Council, so I'm very, very proud of her. It seems that many people take voting for granted, but you and I know that women and people of color have fought for years to get that right to vote. Why is the right to vote so important?
Well, voting is a way to express one's position on issues and on personalities. Every rule that you can think of, whether it's the school board that sets rules for students, compulsory education, it is the legislators who decide how much teachers earn. The process is actually a way that people can have input into the most basic decisions of their lives. And I tell young people, you're going to be around a lot longer than I am. You have a lot at stake, whether it's college tuition or what you learn in school. And the only way you're going to make a difference is at the ballot box. And I think young people, because of the diversity that they see now in people running for office, are going to vote in higher numbers than they ever had before, and that's a good thing.
And you've already talked about what we should say to young people and how important it is to exercise their right to vote, but kind of tell them a little bit about, any reasons why people don't vote.
Well, I think people have a lot of excuses. We haven't always made it easy for people to vote. We've thrown up barriers ourselves, and we have to make elections easy for people. We have to make it convenient. The whole idea now of early voting, where you can take a couple of weeks before the election and find some times when you can vote. A number of the European countries have voting on Saturdays and Sundays when people are likely to have more time and they don't have to take time off from their jobs. So I think there are some legitimate practices that are impediments, and we have to work to overcome those. Oregon does all of its voting by mail. Exactly. An easy way to cast your vote. As a consequence, people participate in elections more. So we can't always blame people. On the other hand, I think people have to realize that they have to think about it, they have to plan for it, and feel comfortable doing it.
Important ideas. It seems when the people are denied the right to participate in government, it only makes them want it more. Back to you, Sid.
You're right, Senator. The right to vote for all people in the United States took some time. Early voting rights were a holdover from colonial days when voting was restricted to property holders. The leaders of the time, namely white male property owners, mistakenly left the system in place, not realizing that this action was the antithesis of the freedom for all that they had been striving to attain.
Antithesis, the direct opposite.
Since virtually all property holders were men, this restriction eliminated everyone else from voting: women, young people, slaves, and servants, even average male wage earners. Some property owners were even disqualified because there were minimum property standards. Some colonies had religious restrictions too, and Indians were also usually excluded.
By now being included in the Constitution, restrictions to suffrage were left to individual states. It's still that way, but 5 amendments to the Constitution keep the states from restricting the right to vote, and that's a fact.
The system was no good. The people were being taxed, but those with no property had no say in decisions that directly affected them. Life in the free colonies was looking just like the old days of English rule, and that didn't set well with the masses.
A little rebellion now and then is a good thing.
The issue of taxation without representation came to a head during the Revolution. Men refused to fight to create another oppressive government. Soon, the property holder restriction was replaced with a taxpayer restriction. Most religious restrictions were also removed, but many others were still left out of the process. Let's go to Senator Miller again for a current look at suffrage. Is anybody left out today? Senator?
Yes, Shavila. As a matter of fact, there are still people who don't have or have lost their rights to vote. Ms. Castor, let's start by talking about convicted felons. In most states, once a person is convicted of a felony, they lose their right to vote. Do they ever get those rights back?
Yes, they do. As a matter of fact, in most of the states, once a felon pays their dues, once they pay restitution, once they serve prison time, once they complete probation, in many of the states, the majority of the states, they automatically receive their rights again, and one of those rights is the precious right to vote. Unfortunately, in our state, in Florida, we have had a much more restrictive policy. And in some of the southern states, that is true, but in Florida, it has been extremely difficult to have one's rights restored. When I was a member of the cabinet, people, ex-felons, had to come personally before the Florida governor and cabinet to ask for their rights to be restored. I mean, how many people can travel from South Florida to Tallahassee to plead for the right to vote? Recently, the governor recommended, to his credit, that Florida adopt an easier way to have voting rights restored. And as a consequence, just in the last 18 months, over 100,000 ex-felons have had their voting rights restored. It still isn't where it should be, but I think a lot of us feel if you've paid your dues, if you have done all of the steps that are necessary, if you are employed and you're contributing to society, there is no reason that you should not be able to vote in this great democracy.
And you have a point there. When I went to the legislature in 1992, bills were being filed then to try to have a least cumbersome process for felons to get their rights restored. I even filed the bill twice myself. Unfortunately, it never was passed. And you're right, you were on the cabinet there, and I didn't know they had to come before the cabinet.
Absolutely.
You think that we're
Yes.
on the right track now, that eventually this will be taken care of?
I think that we're in a much better position. Florida is beginning to join the rest of the nation in trying to speed up the process of restoring someone's rights. I mean, if you committed a drug crime, for instance, as a young person, and you're absolutely clean and you're employed, there's no reason, in my humble estimation, why you should continue to be penalized, especially at the voting box. I happen to believe that restitution and getting people back involved in their government is a pretty basic way of having people fully engaged as good citizens. I mean, that's what we tell people. So we have a backlog today in the state of Florida with hundreds of thousands of people who over the years lost their right to vote. And of course, we know the reason that this started in the beginning. It started way back after the Civil War, when there was still the idea that we could impose a poll tax on people. There was a segregationist attitude, and a lot of this was directed at the African American community. So we still have the remnants of those old attitudes and those old prohibitions with us. But fortunately, we're on the right road, and I think I commend the governor and the cabinet, and they just have to continue along with the legislature, making sure that there are people in place who shuffle the papers, who are responsible for helping people to get their voting rights restored.
I think you hit the nail on the head, convincing the legislature. That's where a lot of that starts. You got a lot of history behind this. Let's talk about, and there's been much talk about illegal immigrants and non-citizens in the news over the past couple of years. What's your feeling on that also?
Well, I think that those illegal immigrants, of course, cannot vote. I think that we have a basic premise in this country: you got to be a citizen to have the voting rights. And I think some of this is obviously going to be wrapped up in how immigrants, legal immigrants, can work their way into a status in this country. It is very controversial, and there are a lot of people who don't even believe that legal immigrants should be able to have rights here in this country. There are a lot of people working here, working in agriculture, for instance, in this state. A lot of, I think the majority, Mexicans who go back and forth, who send a lot of their wages back to their families and their communities. So they're good citizens. But I think we're going to see those people, unfortunately, waiting and having to find that route to citizenship. And by the way, that is really a congressional, that is going to rely on the Congress passing laws, a step-by-step law. And I don't think that there is a consensus yet in the Congress on what the resolution here will be.
I know when you ran for United States Senate a couple of years ago, that was a very hot topic at that particular point in time, and it's still a hot topic today.
It was indeed, and it is now.
Oh, yes, it is. So, Shavila, after all these years, there is still a lot of controversy over suffrage.
Thanks, Senator. Now let's get back to the 1850s, when most of the restrictions to suffrage were gone, provided you were a 21-year-old white male. That left two huge disenfranchised groups, African Americans and women. Wait a minute, that's me.
Disenfranchise, to deprive of a legal right or of some privilege or immunity.
Government cannot endure permanently half slave, half free.
The Civil War was the beginning of the end of slavery. More than 600,000 people paid with their lives, but all weren't lost in vain. Slavery was officially abolished with the 13th Amendment in January 1865. The 14th Amendment in July 1868 gave citizenship to all people born or naturalized in the United States.
I'm at ourdocuments.gov, where you can find these amendments with the history recap. The 13th and 14th Amendments were a start, but not until the 15th Amendment did former slaves get the right to vote. Here's a great site about the right to vote. The 15th Amendment is number 1 here.
The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude.
As of February 1870, African Americans had the right to vote, but it was just the start of a fight for equality that would last for a century or more. In the 1890s, some states enacted literacy tests for the vote, since many former slaves couldn't read. Next came poll taxes and many other deterrents to keep African Americans away from the polls. Poll taxes were outlawed by the 24th Amendment in 1964, but only with the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and its amendment of 1970 were all obstacles finally prohibited by federal law.
Let's check in with Senator Miller for a discussion on what might be current voting obstacles.
Thanks, Sid. Unfortunately, there are obstacles that keep people from voting. Let's talk about things that can encourage people to vote, Ms. Castor. What can we do to encourage people to vote?
Well, my own interest was spurred as a high school student when I ran for student government and was elected. And what a neat process and how exciting it was to have that first experience. I also remember voting for John Kennedy. He was the first president that I had an opportunity to vote for and campaign for. My family was very much engaged in things political. So I've always felt an excitement about elections and electioneering and campaigning. But I also had an experience where I taught school in East Africa, in Uganda. And I know in serving abroad and looking back at this country, what a beacon of hope it was for so many Africans at that time, because they realized that this was a democracy and they could see how democracy worked from afar. And I think students have to understand that voting is what helps to define this country among all the countries of the world. So it's a tremendous empowering experience, and if we can only help students to understand that this is what defines us, I think that we would get more participation in our elections.
You were a former teacher.
Yes, I was.
You were a former, and people don't know this, Commissioner of Education in this state.
Correct.
And a former president of my alma mater, the University of South Florida. So you feel it's very important that we start teaching our high school students right before they get to that age of 18 the importance of voting.
Absolutely. I think school boards, superintendents, officials in school districts, teachers in the classroom have a responsibility, not just an opportunity, they have a responsibility to engage their students in a discussion of democracy, to engage students in a discussion about candidates. They have a responsibility to talk about differences. Certainly they're not going to get partisan. They're not permitted to do that. Right. But that's where the learning begins, from the earliest times in schools. And I think one thing that this whole presidential election period demonstrates is the importance of talking about diversity, talking about candidates, and getting those students engaged. This is the time.
You're absolutely right. And Sid, we want to encourage everyone watching this program to register and vote.
We cannot have a government for all the people until we first make certain it is government of and by all the people.
It took a long time for the government to become of and by all the people. Women had been fighting for suffrage too, and at the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, they began a concentrated campaign. But the abolition of slavery was a bigger issue, and women's suffrage took the back seat. Women were key players in the abolition issue, and when former slaves were given the right to vote first, women felt betrayed. The next year, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and other suffragists sent a voting rights petition to Congress, but nothing came of it.
Meanwhile, things were happening in Great Britain too. I'm online to find out about the Suffragettes. Sounds like a band, but they definitely were not musicians. The Suffragettes were members of the Women's Social and Political Union who used violence to get what they wanted. They broke windows, burned churches, and blew up buildings. Only when World War I began did they stop to support the war effort, but their demonstrations did ultimately succeed. When the war was over, no one wanted a return to the violence. The 1918 Representation of People Act gave women over 30 the right to vote. Not ideal, but a good start. Back in the U.S., women continued the fight, but it took a chance of political embarrassment to bring about change. After the U.S. entered World War I in a declaration of saving democracy, Woodrow Wilson realized the enigma. He was fighting abroad for an ideal denied to half the population back home.
Enigma. Something hard to understand or explain.
As a result, in August 1920, the 19th Amendment to the Constitution gave women the right to vote, just in time for the presidential election.
A similar case of political backlash brought suffrage to another group. 18-year-olds were being drafted into the armed services to fight and die for freedom in Vietnam, but they were denied suffrage at home. In July 1971, the 26th Amendment was added, giving all citizens 18 years or older the right to vote.
Do you think the voting age should be lower or higher than it is?
There's one more suffrage amendment, number 23, and it was created to fix a really unique problem. Washington, D.C. isn't a state. It's the capital city of the United States in the District of Columbia, a federal district created by the Constitution. No problem there. The problem is that voting rights lie with the states, so the citizens of Washington, D.C. had no vote. The 1961 amendment didn't make the district a state, it only gave citizens the right to vote in presidential elections, giving the district the same number of electoral votes it would have if it were a state.
Let's check in one last time with Senator Miller for an overall perspective of how far we've come. Senator?
Sid, we really have expanded the right to vote in this country over the past 200 years. Ms. Castor, we witnessed true example of democracy during the 2008 presidential elections with the first female and the first African American running for president, the highest office in this country. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, as I sit here and think about how the right to vote and suffrage has been expanded in this country, I'm reminded that when my own grandmother was born, women did not have the right to vote. And my mother was born in 1919, which was the year that the suffrage amendment was passed in Congress. So it's been an amazingly quick process in these last years, in our lifetime. Right. We're not finished yet, but it has been, the history of this country has been the history of the expansion of opportunities for all people. And a part of that has been the expansion of opportunity to vote. And I suppose that one of the important things for students is that as they look at the history of this country and the opportunities that people have, this has been one fundamental theme, one fundamental expansion. So I think today that young people ought to be pretty excited about this country. But if they don't know the past, they don't know how precious this opportunity really is.
You're absolutely right. And I remember the first time I ran for office and getting elected, I thought about the many shoulders that I was standing on, having an opportunity to run for office and getting elected and serving in the legislature. It was quite an ordeal. Do you see in the future of this country and even locally more and more women having an opportunity to run for president and more African Americans, regardless of what circumstance would be out there? Do you see that happening?
Absolutely.
More and more?
I think in the final analysis, it's about role models. And in the past year, we have had important role models who have absolutely dominated the news day after day after day after day. And young people, those young African American males and females, have to be saying, hey, this is really possible. At one time they thought the American public wouldn't vote for an African American. They wouldn't vote for a female for president. I think those are now ideas that we can all say, hey, it's changed. It's a changing environment now. And I think it's the whole idea of looking at people and their accomplishments not so much by race, by ethnicity, by gender, but looking at people and what they say. So we've crossed a tremendous threshold here, and we're never going to go back.
We run out of time. I want to thank you for being here. You shed a lot of light on suffrage, and thank you so much for being here. Sid, Shavila, we see it at home and around the world. Suffrage continues to be a pivotal issue in any democracy.
What's the future of suffrage in the United States? Is there a segment of our society that doesn't have the right, but should?
Well, that's the history of suffrage in our country. The process wasn't easy, and it took way longer than it should have. But ultimately, our democratic system did work.
Now it's our job to see that it continues to work. Remember, democracy rules, and you rule in a democracy. See you next time.
Democracy rules!